The streets of Brentwood were quiet that night, bathed in the soft amber glow of street lamps that cast long shadows across manicured lawns. The hum of distant traffic and the occasional bark of a dog punctuated the calm, creating an illusion of peace in one of Los Angeles's wealthiest neighborhoods. Inside 875 South Bundy Drive, Nicole Brown Simpson moved through her home with practiced routine, preparing for bed. The house was immaculately clean, a facade of order overlaying a life that had, behind closed doors, known chaos. Nicole paused in her bedroom, her hand lingering on the photograph of her two children. In her reflection, she saw both strength and vulnerability. Friends had warned her countless times about the dangers of staying entangled in her past with O.J. Simpson, the former football star whose charm masked a volatile temper. The bruises had faded, the fights had subsided, but unease remained, a subtle tension that refused to leave her side. That evening, she felt it more acutely than ever. Something about the night felt wrong, though she could not name it. Outside, the warm Los Angeles air carried little hints of danger. The neighborhood, normally quiet and secure, seemed to hold its breath. Across the street, a neighbor's porch light flickered, casting fleeting shadows that danced across the trimmed hedges. Nicole's dog, usually content to sleep at the foot of the stairs, whimpered softly, its unease a mirror to the subtle tension Nicole could not shake. By 10 o'clock, Nicole had settled into her bedroom, the soft rustle of sheets and the low hum of the ceiling fan filling the room. Outside, a figure moved silently across the driveway. The shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, distorting familiar shapes into menacing forms. In an instant, the calm of the night shattered. A scream pierced the darkness, sharp and horrifying. It was followed by another, softer one, the unmistakable cry of someone struggling, pleading. Across the street, lights flicked on as neighbors ran toward the source, phones clutched in trembling hands. The air seemed to thicken with panic, the night no longer safe or still. Detectives and first responders arrived within minutes, though for Nicole and her friend Ron Goldman, it was already too late. The scene outside the house was nightmarish. Blood streaked the driveway, bright against the dark pavement, telling a story of violence so sudden and brutal it defied comprehension. Footprints, partial and smeared, traced a chaotic path across the scene. Broken objects and personal belongings littered the yard, silent witnesses to the horror that had unfolded. Detective Tom Lang, one of the first on the scene, crouched over the evidence, his experienced eyes taking in every detail. The methodical notes he scribbled belied the shock that ran through him and his team. Each piece of evidence was critical, every detail mattered. DNA samples, the angle of wounds, the positioning of the bodies, all these would soon form the backbone of a case that would grip the nation. The initial responders were acutely aware of the media storm looming on the horizon. In Brentwood, news of violence traveled fast, and Los Angeles's insatiable appetite for celebrity drama meant that cameras and microphones would descend like vultures, seeking the perfect shot, the perfect soundbite. Already, neighbors gathered at the edges of the scene, their curiosity mixed with horror. Meanwhile, Nicole's family, unaware of the tragedy that had struck so close, began to feel the tremors of an impending catastrophe. Calls to the home went unanswered. Friends, sensing something was wrong, started calling in, their voices tinged with fear. In the coming hours, the quiet streets of Brentwood would transform into a hub of chaos, with law enforcement, media, and private citizens all converging on the single most horrifying scene imaginable. The narrative shifts seamlessly between the investigators' meticulous work and the private grief of Nicole's loved ones. The investigators combed the house for clues, examining every surface, every door, every corner for signs of struggle or forced entry. Each minute discovery added layers of complexity to the case, and already the question that would haunt the world began to form. Who could commit such a violent act, and why? Forensic teams arrived, bringing with them the tools and expertise needed to translate the chaotic scene into a story the law could understand. Blood spatter analysis, fingerprints, and trace evidence were cataloged with obsessive precision. Each sample collected was a potential key to solving the mystery, yet the sheer brutality of the crime made the work emotionally taxing. Officers and technicians alike felt the weight of the victims' lives pressing on them, a constant reminder that behind every statistic and report were real people, people with dreams, families, and futures stolen in an instant. The media, too, began to circle. Helicopters hovered in the night sky, their spotlights cutting through the darkness, capturing images of the police activity below. Reporters speculated, whispered, and broadcast, their voices mixing with the sirens and hurried footsteps of those working the scene. In the distance, the world began to learn the names that would soon become infamous: Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. As dawn approached, the neighborhood's once peaceful streets bore the marks of chaos. Caution tape fluttered in the morning breeze, a fragile barrier between ordinary life and the extraordinary tragedy that had occurred. Investigators continued their work, retracing the steps of the victims, piecing together the final moments before death. Each clue, each fragment of evidence hinted at the dark, twisted story beneath the surface. Yet, even amid the horror, there were glimpses of humanity. Neighbors offered support to one another, strangers comforted strangers, and the small acts of kindness stood in contrast to the violence that had occurred. These moments of quiet solidarity reminded everyone involved that life, however fragile, persisted. By the end of the first day, the stage was set for a case that would grip the nation. Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman were gone. Their lives ended in a night of unimaginable violence, yet their story had only just begun. Investigators, families, and a watching public all faced the chilling reality that the search for justice would be long, complicated, and emotionally wrenching. In Brentwood, shadows lingered long after the sun rose, a reminder that some nights leave marks that never fully fade. The murder of Nicole Brown Simpson was more than a crime. It was the beginning of a saga that would reopen old wounds, challenge perceptions of justice, and captivate a nation still struggling to comprehend the darkness lurking behind fame and privilege. The morning after the murders, Brentwood seemed almost normal again, the sun casting a warm glow over manicured lawns and quiet streets. But beneath the calm, tension thrummed like a live wire. The police had cordoned off Nicole Brown Simpson's home with yellow tape, and investigators combed through every inch of the property, their movements precise and deliberate. Every detail mattered. Every trace of evidence could be the key to unlocking the truth. Detective Mark Furman walked the perimeter for the third time, the gravel crunching under his shoes. He examined a discarded glove near the driveway, its presence both puzzling and damning. The other glove had vanished, a clue that would later ignite suspicion and debate. He glanced at his colleagues, noting their exhaustion but also their determination. This was not just another homicide. This was a case that could change everything about their careers and possibly the nation's perception of justice. Across Los Angeles, news vans scrambled to the scene. Helicopters hovered above Brentwood, their rotors slicing through the early morning air. Reporters broadcast live, narrating the scene to a nation that couldn't look away. On television screens from New York to Tokyo, viewers witnessed a story unfold that was part crime, part celebrity spectacle. O.J. Simpson, named once synonymous with football greatness, began to echo through the airwaves in hushed tones, then louder, then everywhere. By the afternoon, detectives had established a timeline of the evening. Nicole had returned home from a late dinner, her evening routine normal on the surface, but the chaos outside her house told another story. Ron Goldman, a young man delivering a simple errand, had been caught in the violence. Blood spatter and forensic analysis revealed the ferocity of the attack, each detail more horrifying than the last. The investigation quickly turned its attention to O.J. Simpson. He had a high-profile presence, an alibi that seemed shaky, and a history with Nicole that complicated the narrative. Detectives knew that questioning him would be delicate. They were aware that pursuing a celebrity suspect could ignite public outrage and draw relentless media attention. Yet, the facts pointed in one direction, and they could not ignore them. Simpson's home became a fortress of its own, with lawyers, agents, and bodyguards moving like shadows. When police attempted to serve him with a subpoena, he was nowhere to be found. The drama escalated into a spectacle that seemed almost cinematic in scope. News reports showed him driving a white Ford Bronco along the freeways of Los Angeles, followed by a phalanx of police vehicles. Helicopters hovered overhead, the thrum of their rotors a constant drumbeat of suspense. Millions watched live as O.J. Simpson, the nation's most famous man, became the focal point of a manhunt unlike any other in history. Inside the investigation, detectives worked tirelessly. DNA samples from the crime scene were matched against known profiles, revealing connections that were both compelling and controversial. Footprints, tire tracks, and bloodstains were scrutinized in forensic labs, every test bringing new revelations and new questions. Witnesses were interviewed repeatedly, their statements dissected and cross-referenced, revealing inconsistencies that could either clarify the timeline or muddle it further. Meanwhile, the families of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman lived in an agonizing limbo. Calls from reporters were relentless. Their grief was raw, immediate, and magnified by the media's constant gaze. They were forced to relive the horror repeatedly, each retelling a reopening of wounds that had barely begun to scab over. Friends and relatives tried to provide comfort, but the shadow of public attention made private mourning nearly impossible. Social and racial tensions in Los Angeles simmered under the surface, fueled by the city's history and the case's high-profile nature. Discussions erupted in public forums and living rooms alike. Could a man of O.J.'s fame commit such a crime? Was the criminal justice system capable of holding him accountable? These questions divided communities, igniting debates that reached far beyond Brentwood and into every corner of the country. Detective Tom Lang, walking through the evidence-laden house, paused at a doorway stained with blood. Each detail was a story, each mark a clue to the violence that had erupted so suddenly. He thought about Nicole and Ron, not just as victims, but as people who had lived full lives, now violently ended. The human element weighed heavily on him, reminding him that the case was more than a legal puzzle. It was a tragedy that demanded justice. The investigation was further complicated by the intense media scrutiny. Every development was broadcast live, every police movement analyzed and criticized. Detectives were careful, knowing that a single misstep could jeopardize the case. At the same time, the public's appetite for updates was insatiable. Every news cycle brought speculation, rumors, and conflicting theories, adding layers of tension and pressure that weighed on everyone involved. Days turned into weeks, and the investigation intensified. Detectives retraced O.J. Simpson's movements, scrutinizing his interactions, his phone records, and his purchases. Lawyers for both sides prepared for what would become the trial of the century. Forensic experts debated their findings in hushed offices, knowing that every piece of evidence could be dissected under the most intense legal scrutiny. But amid the frenzy, small details emerged that hinted at the complexity of the crime. The glove found at the scene, the broken fence latch, a trail of blood leading away from the driveway. Each clue carried significance, yet each also opened new questions. It became clear that the case was not straightforward. The story was more complicated than the public could see. By the time the trial loomed on the horizon, the nation had already been gripped by the drama of the hunt. O.J. Simpson had become both suspect and symbol, a man under suspicion, a celebrity under siege, and the focus of a media spectacle unlike any before. The investigation, meticulous and methodical, had set the stage for courtroom drama, public debate, and the enduring tension between fame and justice. The hunt for answers had begun in earnest, but for Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman, there would be no return. Their lives were cut short, yet their stories had ignited a cultural conversation that would last for decades. In Brentwood, shadows lingered over manicured lawns and quiet streets, a reminder that violence could erupt anywhere and that fame could not shield one from tragedy. The detectives worked tirelessly, the families waited anxiously, and the world watched with bated breath. Every step of the investigation was a delicate dance of precision, patience, and persistence. And while the facts slowly emerged, one truth remained stark and undeniable. This case would redefine celebrity, media, and justice in ways that no one could have anticipated. By the end of Part 2, readers feel the tension of the investigation, the intensity of the media storm, and the anticipation of the trial to come. The hunt for justice is underway, but the questions about guilt, innocence, and accountability linger in the air, unresolved and haunting. The courtroom was electric. Every seat filled, every eye focused, every camera trained on the man at the center of a storm that had consumed the nation. O.J. Simpson, once a celebrated football icon and television personality, now sat in the defendant's chair, a figure both familiar and terrifying. The trial that would come to be called the trial of the century had begun, and the world watched, captivated, divided, and deeply invested. The prosecution, led by Marcia Clark and Christopher Darden, approached the case with precision and determination. Their mission was straightforward but daunting: prove that O.J. Simpson had murdered his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend Ron Goldman. Yet the very simplicity of the mission belied the extraordinary challenges they faced. Every piece of evidence would be scrutinized, every word uttered dissected by an audience of millions, and a jury that carried the weight of the nation's attention. DNA evidence, still relatively new in criminal trials, was presented with painstaking detail. Blood samples collected from the crime scene, the driveway, and Simpson's home were analyzed and compared. Expert witnesses explained the significance of blood type matches, the likelihood of contamination, and the science of forensic testing. Each presentation was met with a mixture of awe and skepticism from the courtroom audience. To some, the science was irrefutable. To others, it was a labyrinth of technicalities that could be twisted and questioned. The defense, famously dubbed the Dream Team, countered with a calculated and strategic approach. Johnny Cochran, Robert Shapiro, and F. Lee Bailey, among others, skillfully cast doubt on the prosecution's case. They argued potential contamination, mishandling of evidence, and systemic bias within the Los Angeles Police Department. The infamous phrase, "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit," would later be etched into public consciousness, a symbol of their courtroom prowess. Every objection, every motion, and every dramatic flourish in the courtroom was carefully calculated to sway perception as much as the jury. Testimonies brought tension to a breaking point. Witness after witness entered, their accounts a mixture of grief, fear, and recollection. Police officers described the discovery of the bodies, the meticulous collection of evidence, and the overwhelming impact of the scene. Friends and family members recounted intimate details of Nicole's life, her struggles, her fears, and the moments of joy now permanently shadowed by tragedy. Each testimony was a raw emotional punch, a reminder that the case was not just about facts, it was about human lives irreversibly altered. Simpson's own appearances were scrutinized relentlessly. His composure, his demeanor, and even his clothing choices became points of analysis for the media and public alike. Every gesture was dissected, a shrug, a sigh, a raised eyebrow. The cameras captured it all, broadcasting to living rooms across America, turning him into both defendant and celebrity spectacle. The courtroom became a theater, the trial itself a performance with stakes higher than most could comprehend. Racial tension in Los Angeles was palpable. The defense leveraged historical mistrust between the African American community and the LAPD, framing the case within a broader context of systemic injustice. In doing so, they created a narrative that resonated deeply with some communities, while alienating others. Public opinion was split along racial and cultural lines, each side convinced they saw the truth while questioning the motives of the other. The trial had become more than a legal battle. It was a mirror reflecting the complexities of a divided society. Cross-examinations were the heart of the drama. Lawyers challenged witnesses with sharp precision, revealing inconsistencies, contradictions, and moments of uncertainty. Some witnesses faltered under pressure, their credibility questioned. Others stood firm, their accounts delivering gut-wrenching clarity. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, like a taut wire ready to snap. Each day ended with the public and media speculating endlessly on who had won the round, who had faltered, and what the next day would reveal. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered daily. Protesters, supporters, and curious onlookers formed a constant presence. News vans, satellite trucks, and media crews created a chaotic perimeter, capturing reactions, opinions, and every visible emotion. The public was no longer a passive observer. They were participants in a story that had become national theater. Families, celebrities, and ordinary citizens all weighed in, their voices adding layers of complexity, outrage, and fascination to a trial that was already historic. As weeks turned into months, the emotional toll became evident. Jurors, sequestered and isolated, bore the weight of a decision that would not only impact the defendant, but resonate across the country. The lawyers, both defense and prosecution, labored under enormous pressure, knowing that every strategy, every objection, and every line of questioning could sway the outcome. Investigators revisited the evidence repeatedly, ensuring nothing was overlooked, each day bringing new tension and scrutiny. The trial reached its peak with dramatic moments that would define legal history. The presentation of the gloves, the recreation of crime scene evidence, and the intense focus on Simpson's behavior all contributed to a sense of suspense that transcended typical courtroom drama. Viewers felt as though they were witnessing a battle for truth itself, with stakes that were both deeply personal and broadly societal. Throughout it all, the families of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman experienced a roller coaster of grief and hope. They watched as evidence was debated, their loved ones' stories exposed to the world. Pain intermingled with frustration as legal technicalities sometimes overshadowed emotional truths. Yet their presence, their testimony, and their resilience remained a silent, unwavering force within the courtroom. By the time closing arguments were made, the trial had become a culmination of months of tension, scrutiny, and spectacle. The prosecution emphasized the weight of evidence, the brutality of the crime, and the need for justice. The defense appealed to doubt, human error, and the broader context of systemic issues. The jury faced an unenviable task to untangle truth from doubt, evidence from perception, and justice from spectacle. As the jury retired to deliberate, the world waited. Television screens, newspapers, and conversations across America centered on one question: will justice prevail? The story of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman had captivated the nation, but the outcome remained uncertain. Every moment of silence, every closed door in that deliberation room heightened suspense and anxiety. Part 3 ends on this edge-of-the-seat tension, with the trial concluded but the verdict still pending, leaving readers anxious and engaged, eager to discover the outcome in the final part. The day the verdict was announced, Los Angeles and much of the world held its collective breath. In the courtroom, silence gave way to gasps, tears, and stunned murmurs as the jury declared O.J. Simpson not guilty. For some, it was a triumph of legal strategy and doubt. For others, it was a bitter, almost unbearable injustice. The verdict did not close the case. It reopened old wounds that had barely begun to heal. For the families of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman, the acquittal was a cruel twist of fate. They had endured months of relentless media attention, courtroom drama, and the horror of reliving the murders at every turn. Now, after everything, there was no legal closure, no sense of justice served. Grief mingled with anger, confusion, and heartbreak. The world's eyes were upon them, but sympathy was never enough to fill the void left by two lives violently taken. The public reaction was as polarized as the verdict itself. Across Los Angeles, racial and cultural tensions flared. Communities that felt systemic injustice in law enforcement saw the acquittal as a necessary correction. Others, horrified by the perceived failure of justice, reacted with anger, frustration, and disbelief. Streets erupted in debate and protest. Water cooler conversations, dinner table discussions, and office chatter were dominated by speculation, moral judgment, and social reflection. The murder had been a tragedy, but the trial had become a mirror reflecting the deep divides of American society. The media frenzy did not dissipate with the verdict. Newspapers printed special editions, television networks replayed trial highlights endlessly, and documentaries began cropping up almost immediately. The story of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman became immortalized in footage, photographs, interviews, and reenactments. Every new angle brought both attention and intrusion, keeping the grief of the families in public view. Friends and relatives struggled with this exposure, constantly reminded of the crime that had stolen two lives and the unresolved questions left behind. Investigators and law enforcement officers continued to reflect on the case long after the trial ended. Detective Mark Furman, Detective Tom Lange, and others reviewed the evidence, analyzed their mistakes, and considered what could have been done differently. The investigation had been thorough, meticulous, and by many accounts professionally handled, but it could not overcome the challenges posed by celebrity, media scrutiny, and public perception. For the detectives, justice felt unfinished, and the weight of failure lingered quietly, a shadow that would follow them for years. Meanwhile, O.J.'s life changed dramatically. Though acquitted, his reputation was forever altered. Endorsements disappeared, former fans debated his guilt, and his public persona became a symbol of both fame and controversy. The courtroom drama followed him like a specter, a reminder that celebrity could not insulate anyone from suspicion, and that media attention could amplify even private tragedy into a global spectacle. The murder of Nicole Brown Simpson also left an enduring impact on discussions of domestic violence. Her life and death became a rallying point for advocacy, awareness, and reform. Support groups, media campaigns, and social initiatives highlighted the often hidden struggles faced by victims of abuse, particularly in situations involving wealthy or famous partners. Nicole's story became a cautionary tale, a reminder that domestic violence can escalate with devastating consequences, and that victims often suffer in silence. Legal scholars and criminal justice experts also examined the trial for decades afterward. The case became a case study in forensic science, courtroom strategy, and media influence. Law schools dissected the DNA evidence, the defense's tactics, and the prosecution's handling of the case. Scholars debated whether fame, race, and media scrutiny had distorted the pursuit of justice. The trial became a benchmark, a cultural touchstone that shaped how high-profile cases were investigated, prosecuted, and reported. Yet, amid societal reflection, the human cost remained immediate and personal. Nicole's children grew up without their mother, carrying scars that no trial could heal. Ron Goldman's family mourned the loss of a son, brother, and friend, their grief intensified by the public spectacle surrounding his death. Friends and extended family lived with the haunting knowledge that justice had not been served in the way they had hoped. The trial may have concluded, but the emotional aftermath stretched far beyond the courtroom. Time passed, but the wounds never fully closed. The murder of Nicole Brown Simpson became part of the cultural fabric of America, referenced in television shows, documentaries, books, and conversations. It was not merely a headline, it was a story that continued to provoke debate, reflection, and deep emotion. Every retelling emphasized different aspects: the crime, the investigation, the trial, the media circus, but at its core remained the same undeniable truth. 2 lives were lost in a violent, tragic night, and the world would never forget. Some aspects of the case remain shrouded in mystery. Questions about the timeline, the evidence, and possible alternate theories lingered in the public imagination. True resolution remained elusive, leaving a tension that was uncomfortable yet compelling. Historians, journalists, and amateur sleuths continued to analyze, debate, and speculate, seeking answers that might never come. The case had become not just a legal story, but a cautionary tale about fame, justice, and the fragility of human life. In Brentwood, the neighborhood itself slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy, but the echoes of that night lingered. The houses, the streets, and the trees stood as silent witnesses to a tragedy that had shaken an entire city and captured the attention of the world. Shadows lingered longer than they should, a subtle reminder that some nights leave marks that never fade. Ultimately, the story of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman is more than a crime. It is a study of the human condition. It is about grief, fear, obsession, and the interplay of fame and tragedy. It is about how society responds to violence, how media shapes perception, and how individuals struggle to find justice in a world that is often unfair. The murder left an indelible mark on families, investigators, and an entire nation. As the sun sets over Los Angeles, the memory of that night remains. Streets once filled with ordinary life now carry the weight of history. Justice may have been elusive, but the lessons endure. The murder of Nicole Brown Simpson reopened old wounds, challenged assumptions, and reminded the world that some stories, no matter how sensational, are ultimately about humanity, the fragility of life, the consequences of violence, and the enduring hope for truth. The world moved on, but the shadow of that June night lingered, a haunting testament to lives lost, questions unanswered, and wounds that time could not fully heal. And in that lingering shadow, the story remained vivid, compelling, and unforgettable. A story that would continue to provoke thought, reflection, and emotion for generations.